start refining all this stuff, you know, it's like it's not there. It's absolutely not there. It needs to get to a point where it feels like skin, it feels like compressed fatty flesh, you know. So, and you know, this isn't a speed competition. Even though there's people who can sculpt really, really fast, the point isn't to do it fast. The point is to make it good, you know. And I feel like a lot of people are like, hey, look, check out my sculpture, you know. And then when you look at it, you're like, this looks like they didn't spend any time on it. And then, you know, I always try to encourage people to look at anatomy, work on it some more, and then somebody will contact me a half hour later and be like, what do you think now? And I'm like, it doesn't look like you really spent any time on it, you know? It's like you need to, it takes hours, if not days, to get forms and things looking really clean and really, really nice. And the clay right now is getting a really nice leathery consistency where you can go in and do this. Now, at the stage that it's at right now, it's really starting to feel more like Roma or like a plastiline clay, you know? The stage that it's at right now is more firmer and easier to manipulate into these smaller, you know, forms, you know? But I'll do a lot of this kind of thing that I'm doing right now. And some of these wrinkles, or not wrinkles, but some of these rake lines that I'm putting in here, I might even just leave eventually, like the very beginnings of it, and those will eventually become full-blown wrinkles, you know, like compression in the forehead, you know. Some of these will become like the beginnings of skin detail, you know, which we'll be covering skin detail next Saturday, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Next Saturday, last class.
Last class. And by the way, I'm having a blast doing this. This has been so fun. It's not something that I do as far as teaching and talking about what I'm doing, you know, like it's an entirely new experience for me to be doing this. I don't usually, you know, sculpt and talk about every little stroke of what I'm doing. I usually have headphones on, listening to like pretty aggressive music. Like I said last week, you know, Misfits, Slayer, you know, whatever, you know, The Damned, you know, that kind of stuff, thrash metal, you know, you name it, or sometimes, you know, heavy soundtracks, you know, Goblin and you know, the soundtrack from Suspiria, you know, like stuff that's really intense. I usually have headphones on. If you ever see pictures of me working, I almost always have headphones on because I blast music directly into my brain because it gets me into the zone, you know? So I love intense soundtracks or fast, aggressive music or stuff that's really, really moody, that you can just kind of like, the whole world disappears and all you're looking at is just these wrinkles, you know? And that's, to me, where it gets fun is when you get into that zone, you know? You get into the zone where it's almost like you're not even thinking about what you're doing. This is, teaching a class is the complete opposite. It's you're thinking about everything you're doing. But when you actually are sculpting for a project or, you know, a personal piece, you know, I'm not thinking about every stroke that I'm doing. It's almost kind of like second nature. You know, it's like when you play the guitar is a good thing to compare it to. If you're actually thinking about every single fret that you're putting your fingers on, you're going to mess up, you know. A really good guitar player, a really great musician, it comes naturally and you're just playing and you're not thinking about it. And you kind of want to get into that zone for sculpting as well, you know. So that's where, for me, where music comes in, you know, so loud, aggressive, or intense, you know, music that kind of helps me get into that place in my brain, you know.
And don't be frustrated if that state of flow does not come quick. You have to build up that muscle memory over a good period of time.
Yeah.
Before that starts happening, just like playing the guitar.
You're 100% right. I couldn't have put it any better. That's exactly right. You're kind of building a muscle memory, you know, where it just comes naturally, you know, and it might not come naturally very quickly. You know, when you're a beginner, it doesn't, you know. like I said, nobody picks up the guitar for the first time and they're Eddie Van Halen, you know, like people, you know, same thing goes with sculpting or painting or any other thing that you want to get really, really good at. It takes tons and tons of practice. And, you know, don't get frustrated if the very first things that you do aren't good. You know, like I said, I told you the story earlier. I thought, you know, when I was 16, I had made this pretty cool Planet of the Apes makeup, and then when I went to a contest, you know, no one looked twice at it because it was so crude, you know. And it's like, that's how you know, you have to get better. You have to, you know, work at just getting better. Your first few things aren't going to be that great, you know. Don't expect tons of praise with your very first sculpture. You know, it's not likely, you know, to get to be there. You know, do 5 sculptures, 10 sculptures, and then, you know, the first 5 or 6 are probably going to be pretty bad, you know, but that's perfectly okay. You know, that's the way it should be. You know, you're going to learn, you know, so. I don't know if you noticed too what I did. I think I might have mentioned this. I started making these teeth a little more crooked. And again, they're going to get more refined than this. This is very, very rough. But I started to make these teeth look like, you know, he's got some seriously crooked teeth, you know, on the bottom. And I feel like that gives it character, you know. So, yeah.
By the way, even though this is your very first time ever teaching monster sculpture, your students love your teaching style.
Oh, thank you.
You're doing a fabulous job.
Thank you very much. I'm having a lot of fun, and it's very cool to share this stuff with you guys out there. It really is. It's a lot of fun, you know, to know that, you know, there's people out there that are interested in this stuff and, you know, want to learn this stuff. It like makes me very happy. It's like an absolute pleasure to do this. It's like a great way to spend an afternoon. I would probably be doing this in my garage, you know, if, you know, sometimes I just get inspired and I'm like, I want to make a mask for myself or whatever, and I'll you know, sit and just make something, you know. There's extreme satisfaction and pleasure, you know, when you make your first mask or you make your first thing, anything for that matter, but I'll use it in the context of making masks. First time I make a mask, or even to this day, I sculpt this thing, I make the mold on it. The second I pull that latex pull out, I dwell it and I let it dry, and I pull that thing out, an untrimmed, you know, latex mask, and I still get that thrill that I did when I was a teenager, you know, of you know, that excitement of like, wow, this is fun, you know. It's like there's something really cool about making stuff, you know. I mean, I do music, you know, I play music, I play guitar, I play drums, and I've played in some small little bands for fun too, and that's really, really fun too. It's a similar thing, you know. It's just an intense satisfaction of creating something, you know, whether it's music or art, you know. That's why, you know, I chose art. It's something that, like, you know, I gravitated to since I was a kid. Since a little kid, I was drawing since I was, like, you know, old enough to hold a pencil, you know. And so it's something I gravitated to, and you know, something that still, like, gives me an incredible amount of satisfaction to make something. Now, you know, that leads us to the idea of having to make something when you're being paid and you're under the gun, you know, which I could tell you that's a lot harder, but you have to find a way to draw that same level of inspiration, you know, when you're being paid, you know. I know that there's people, and I've worked with people that are really good sculptors when they do stuff at home for themselves, but you put them in a shop situation or in a work situation where they're under the gun, and a lot of times I've seen with a handful of people here and there over the years, when you put them in a high pressure situation where they have to perform on command, you know, like you have to be creative, like you punch in your clock and like right now it's go time, you know, you have to be creative, and you're You're no longer in your basement or your garage or your bedroom making a mask. Now you have to make it when people are critiquing you and people are giving you notes and you're doing all this kind of stuff. And then that's, I think in a way that sort of like separates, the men from the boys, so to speak, to use a very old-fashioned term, It's like, now it's the ladies are involved too. So, it's like, that's what separates, that's really where you really have to draw some massive inspiration and now you're under the gun, you have to deliver, And I've seen really good sculptors not do very good work sometimes in a shop situation like that because they weren't able to cut it, and it's a whole other thing to sculpt on demand, It's actually a conversation I had with Chet Zar, who's like another really, really he's an old friend of mine and I highly respected artist, and he's doing his own stuff too, and he still does some stuff now and again for movies. But a lot of people, you might know his work, but it's like we've talked about that whole dynamic of like having to be creative on demand, Like you come in and you punch in a clock and you have to be creative. You have to do your best work, And that's kind of it comes from just practice and being disciplined, You just can't come in and do what you would do at home. It's art and it's also discipline, I think if you were to compare it to anything, it would be like let's say you're playing an instrument at home, and then suddenly somebody asks you to play for the Philharmonic, and then you have to okay, I'm great in my bedroom, but can I get in front of 100, 200, 300, or 1,000 people and be as good as I am in the bedroom, or in my garage or whatever, it's kind of like that. Working on a movie is like, you've graduated to now you're from playing guitar in your bedroom to now you're playing in the Philharmonic, and every note has to be perfect, and it is that level of challenge,
It's even, I would argue, it's even higher because the Philharmonic, if they have one bad night, fine, but if you have a bad day on a film, well, it's going to be on screen forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Forever. Your mistakes will be there to remind you.
Yeah, I know. And then
crap, I should have worked a little harder on that.
Yeah.
Look at it.
Yeah, there's been situations like that where you're like, oh boy, I kind of don't want anybody to know that I worked on that movie.
Hey, for as many Jurassic Parks and Terminators and Predators on Dad's resume, there are some shows on there that he was not so proud of how they turned out. It happens to everybody.
No, that's the way it is. That's the way it is. You always kind of hope. And for movies, you're relying not just on yourself delivering, but you're relying on the DP delivering, and you're relying on the director delivering, and you're relying on the editor delivering. So, there's so many players in that world, that, it's like everybody has to do their job, Just going to grab the back end of a paint tool, and sometimes when I get round shapes in there, sometimes a normal tool won't work, so I'll just push stuff around with the back of a brush,
Just a reminder, for those of you who have not seen it, Shannon Shea has a fantastic lesson on making sculpting tools.
Nice.
On the site, and there's a lot going on in the chat about tools right now. So please do check that out. Shannon Shea shows you how to make your own custom tools. Of course, he just gives you ideas. You should go ahead and do as much experimenting as you want. There's really no right answer for sculpting tools. It's whatever gets the effect you're looking for.
Yeah. When I first started sculpting, just when I was a kid, I couldn't get my hands on very good sculpting tools. I mean, they had a couple of sculpting tools that were probably from the 50s, like sitting in a drawer somewhere in art class, and I was like, kind of like, I couldn't get my hands on sculpting tools, so I was sculpting with a butter knife, and chopsticks and whatever I can get my hands on. I used to texture stuff with a with a towel. It's like so use whatever works for you.
So young Jack Turbush, who is watching right now, 13-year-old monster maker.
Awesome.
He's saying, why does Norman put all those lines on the forehead? Doesn't he want it to be smooth? Well, Jack, those are going to go away.
Yeah.
Those rake lines are there.
The little rake lines that he's talking about. Yeah, that eventually these eventually will go away. I mean, that's what I was kind of explaining with the concept of like when you chisel. The old days of sculpting, when they used to sculpt out of marble, they would put a bunch of lines and stuff, So, like, I'll eventually do like that, for example. I mean, I'm going to show you really quickly since you asked the question, but I'm going to take a lot of this stuff down, Those little lines that you see in there, those are going to go away, Again, I've probably said this a few times, but when you start sculpting, it's not like you immediately put down what's going to be there, You don't immediately jump into detail. You don't immediately jump into your final skin texture. You never, ever, ever do that. So you're going to see lines and little pieces of globby clay and all kinds of stuff that's unsightly, You're going to see that. It's not it's like if I could walk in here with a finished sculpture and pretend like I was working on it, and then you wouldn't be learning anything, This isn't the finished sculpture. This is very, very rough. It still has a lot of little clay globs and kind of messy little just thoughts and ideas everywhere, like I don't know, I might do this here, I might change that there, but those lines that you see there are just lines that I use to sort of like just to kind of map some ideas out, The lines in the forehead that I have going on here are too regular and too symmetrical and too like kind of contrived, maybe just a little too stylized. So I'll go in and I'll kind of mash them down and I'll use a little bit of water, and stuff on the tip of my finger to sort of like make it more organic, It's like it's a matter of putting stuff on there and correcting your mistakes, It's like you don't put every little stroke doesn't have to be perfect.
Unless you're Moto hot.
Unless you're Moto. It's the only guy I've ever seen that's like puts something in place and that's where it stays, Like he's literally the only guy. I mean, every other sculptor that I know kind of finds it, finds the sweetness, like searches around for it. You're digging around in the woods, or you're digging around trying to find gold, It's like it's not quite there. But you can kind of see right now I'm sort of getting started with kind of playing around with how these wrinkles lay on the forehead. They were just too concentric, and too like stylized. I mean, if you want to go for stylized, that's cool too. And I actually want this to have a little bit of a stylized vibe because there's something about this Japanese demons, and that's what this is based on. That they have a stylized kind of feel, and even though I'm trying to make this look realistic, I want to still give it a little bit of a stylization to it so that it's kind of fun,
There's some fun stuff going on in the chat about texturing here, and I want to share with you.
Okay.
Number one, Jeffrey said that Yoda was supposedly textured with a terry cloth towel.
Yeah.
Rumor has it Stuart Freeborn textured all his sculptures that way. Have you ever heard that?
I think I might have heard that rumor. I mean, I can't, confirm or deny it, but I have heard that rumor. And
just goes to show you, anything can be used.
Yeah, and I, like I said, before I'm going to get next week, I'm going to get into texture stamps, which that's what I have this bag here. Since you guys are specifically talking about that, I'll show you this real quick, and we'll get into this next week. Which should I show it over here, or over there? This way. Okay. So these are texture stamps, and you make these with latex off of little plaster bucks. And I'll kind of explain a little bit how these are done, but texture pads are a really quick way to texture stuff. Like you just press it on there and you text, and you got texture. Now, you don't want to go too crazy with these things because it starts to look contrived and artificial, but that's one way to do stuff. But I'm going to cover that next week when we get into detailing. We're not even close to detailing yet. Okay?
No detailing yet.
Right. But as far as the terry cloth towel is concerned, before I even knew that, what he said about Yoda and Stuart Freeborn, I actually did texture stuff with a towel, like a terry cloth towel, to make pores when I was a little kid because I didn't know any better, And I was like, hey, this works, So I did that, And it's trial by error, or whatever you call that,
You and Stuart Freeborn.
Yeah, exactly.
A couple other fun things. Jesse, when Jesse first started out, used a dinner spoon.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't have any tools. Still uses it to this day.
Oh, yeah.
Jeffrey says tongue depressors actually make great impromptu sculpture tools.
Yeah.
You can break them. You can make them more slender. You can do all kinds of stuff. And then finally, since we've been talking about Jordu quite a bit today, Jonathan points out that Jordu says it's not the arrow, it's the Indian or Native American.
Yeah.
Meaning you don't have to have incredible tools. It's more about your sculpting skills, and that is so true.
That is that's absolutely true. And Jordu, when he blocks stuff out, his first block out, he uses no tools at all. I don't know if you ever noticed when he's blocking stuff, he just does it all he just puts clay on there, he starts moving it around with his fingers. I tend to like these rakes and these things like that, when I'm blocking stuff out. But Jordu, a lot of times, he'll have like one or two tools and basically just starts throwing stuff on there. It's whatever works for you. That's I'm presenting some ideas and concepts that hopefully you can learn from and put into your work. But none of this stuff really is gospel. It's whatever works for you. Whatever works for you is what's good. And I think you can see different techniques. If like I said before, if there was a different sculptor sitting here, you might be learning a different set of techniques. This is just one way to do something. So find your favorite way to do it. And I know that I've learned a lot of stuff from watching other artists and whatnot. I keep doing multiple passes on this brow just to get it to look more and more organic. It's still not there, but it's like, I like using this sponge. It's nice to sort of smooth things around. You can see it's kind of starting to get a softer feel. Doesn't look as craggy. You want to slowly work out that cragginess, I mean, there's all sorts of schools of thought, remember working for Steve Johnson, he'd be like, leave your sculptures rough. You refine it too much. And I'm like, huh? Never had anybody tell me to not refine a sculpture, but believe it or not, Steve was like, don't refine the sculpture so much. And I was like, why? And he's like, I like to leave it rough because it reads better, but the funny thing is there's a little bit of a method to that madness, It's like sometimes too much refining, you lose some of the energy of it, You do. So there is a method to that insanity, there is a theory and a logic to. Sometimes you can refine something so much that it loses its power and character, So he was a big fan of kind of leaving stuff kind of rough, And there were other guys back during that era too. The guy who's Screaming Mad George was another guy was really a kind of a big name back then. And George would his sculptures were really rough. You could literally see the clay balls on it practically. Put the clay ball on there and then kind of take some water or alcohol and go and brush and then mash stuff down, and you'd see all kinds of chaotic stuff all over it. But then he'd paint it and it would just be blam, the thing would come to life. It was just because he knew how he was going to paint it, He knew where it was going to go. He knew where the finished product was, how it was going to look on the screen. And if you want to see some of George's cool work, Poltergeist 2 has some beautiful stuff that Screaming Mad George did, you know, and I think he was primarily responsible for that the worm demon thing that comes, you know, it's like they use an amputee guy, and that thing is just amazing, and the paint job is just absolutely gorgeous, and it's really it's almost like it almost takes on like a fine art kind of looseness to it. It's really super cool, you know. Like I love that stuff too, you know. You know, Dick Smith is another guy example. Guy's beautiful, beautiful, clean work. But when you look at some of his early stuff, and I've been lucky enough to see some of his appliances really up close, like in microscope, you know, like it's literally right in front of me, so I can study every little nuance of it. And some of the stuff is a little jagged and a little loose, like on purpose, because he knew how it was going to read, you know, on film, and he didn't over fuss over certain things, you know, didn't fuss over it too much, you know, because he knew what was going to play and what wasn't going to play, you know, and there is something to be said about that, like super refined, crazy, you know, like over the top refining, and then there's leaving a little bit of roughness to it that kind of just makes it fun and maybe read a little bit better, you know.
Some other sculpting tools some of your students have used, crochet hooks.
Oh, yeah.
Christine Rose has used those.
Mm-hmm.
And Christine says her mom used to get mad at her for stealing her metal skewers for shish kebabs for sculpting and other projects. So
Yeah.
You can use almost anything.
Yeah, you can. And you know what? I think I know I mentioned this a couple times before, but Mitch Devane like purposefully goes to like stuff like the 99-cent store and to find weird stuff to use for tools. I mean, and Mitch is one of the best sculptors in the business, you know. And here's one of the greatest things that Mitch showed me, the old lemon zester. I've mentioned this like 4 times already. This thing is so fucking cool. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to curse, right? This thing is really, really cool. You know, like it's just, you know, you can get in there and like do this really fun, like refining, you know, like with it. And this is just, you know, what do you use a lemon zester for when you want to like sprinkle stuff into cocktails or whatever, you know, like, I mean, or cooking, you know, and stuff. It's just it's a weird tool that you wouldn't think of using for sculpting, but like I saw Mitch using one of these one day, and I was like, wow, I really like the control that I'm getting from this thing, you know. And so I went out and bought one, and now I use it like crazy, you know. It's like, you know, you can and again, it's like, you know, it's scratchy at first, you know, but like you can refine shapes out really nicely with it, you know, and kind of flatten one side of a wrinkle and puff the other side out, you know. And then, you know, of course, you're going to go back and smooth all this stuff out, but skin has a natural kind of lumpiness to it that you're trying to achieve, you know. And later on, you know, like, or on next Saturday when we start talking about skin detail, you're going to want to rough that surface up even more. Like, I'm going to get next week, we'll get into this. Like, I like to use this little rubber thumb thing, you know, and like this breaks up the surface really nicely, you know. This is where you start getting into detail. So like this right now, even though it's insanely rough, it's really chaotic and rough, you're gonna eventually refine all this stuff out, you know. I'm gonna cover virtually the whole surface with this, and what I'm trying to do is essentially think about it as like you're breaking the surface tension of what you sculpted, and you're trying to make it look more like skin, you know. You can kind of see what's going on there. You see that? This is like the preliminary detailing. I usually like to do a pass of this, you know, before I get into doing a little more hand detailing and texture pads. But like this is really fun, you know. You can do that, and then what I usually do is get a little bit of water on just a ceramic sponge like this, and you kind of soften a lot of the stuff out. you know, and then you'll start getting more skin-like stuff. And I'll still go back. Again, it's never about doing it all in one pass. You know, I'll go back and I'll be like, I want to tighten this wrinkle up again. I want to tighten that wrinkle up again. Kind of selectively pull out some of the stuff that I want to do, and then, and like, you know, put in a lot finer. This gets into more detail, which we'll cover more, you know, next week. But you know, this is, I might even go back and erase all this stuff out. But what I'm doing is I'm slowly breaking that surface tension, you know, and putting more character into it and more, you know.
We were wondering in the chat whatever happened to Screaming Mad George. Apparently, Jeffrey says he's been directing lots of music videos.
Yeah, he moved back to Japan, you know. It's a really creative, wild character, you know, like, and he came back to visit not long ago, and I saw him briefly, you know, like at a party, you know, and you know, he's a crazy character. He's a very original human being, man. You know, he's a guy who's like, you know, I love people like that who they march to the beat of their own drum, you know, like he just is the way he wants to be, you know, and I think that's the best way to be. You know, don't be something you're not. Don't be something that someone expects you to be. And he's a guy who just is himself, and he's a very original, very creative dude, you know. And I think he's a really cool guy, you know.